For Chapter 18, we talked about the different methods used that can discharge a contract. And so, like, the first one is a condition, and that's when something must happen in order for a future event to happen, or something kind of like that. Because there's first gonna go. The condition is the precedent condition. That's when the condition must happen, and then the duty in which they're having agreement on will happen. So, like, I will pay you, and then you can come fix or mow my yard, something like that. And then there's also subsequent conditions. This is when a duty will happen, and then you pay. And that's like if someone comes out and fixes your car, and then you pay them afterwards for all the expenses and for their time, that would be like a subsequent condition. Then there's also concurrent conditions. That's when it's something's happening on both sides, like the condition and the duty that is being acted on happen at the same time. There's also express and implied conditions. Express conditions are usually like, if something happens, then yes, or when this happens, then yes. There's also implied conditions, and that's just things that are just basic understanding to a contract that are just known by both sides, or like something that is implied about it, like it's kind of already known. Next I'm going to talk about is the discharge by performance. So that's the second method, second method, and that's discharge by performance is, if the performance is really bad, then the whole thing just gets discharged. Like, it's usually like the other party will have to make up for it. So there's substantial performance, and that's when it does not meet meet expectations. So they will have to. They may have to pay extra. They may have to pay for what they didn't quite do, or whatever the agreement's on. Usually that's decided by the courts of if it was substantial enough or not. And there's also complete performance. That's when it was all done well, and there's nothing to really discharge because it's all right. Then there's also material and minor breach, and that when it comes to those contracts, so like the material breach is if it's not up to standards, and it's the material used or whatever the duty acted upon was, it just did not live up to how it was supposed to, and I guess really bad. And that's kind of a material breach. Minor breach is when it's like didn't quite meet what they wanted, or did not quite meet the standards that was like kind of set forth. Then they may have to compensate a little bit for it, but it's not much. It's just a little minor. Next one is discharge by agreement. So this can be like agreement of both parties agree that they just don't want, like, they want to discharge this contract that's between them, or something like anything kind of like that. So there's like a mutual agreement to it. And there's kind of a couple different things when it comes to discharge by agreement. First one's that mutual rescission. So this is when they make another agreement that also satisfies the legal requirements for a contract. So like if if some company were to hire another company to come help them with some parts so that they meet the requirements of that contract, then this would be a mutual rescission. Because there's a consideration and acceptance to it. Then there's discharge by innovation. That's when both parties agree on a third party to come in and substitute for one of the parties of the original contract. So there's just like another company coming in for it. There's discharge by accord, and that's when they have to satisfy an existing contractual duty that is not yet discharged. So they have to do more to what the actual contract was. And then there's also satisfaction discharge. And that's when it kind of goes on the performance of the accord agreement. So it's like if it was quite up to code or not. Next one is the last one is the discharge by operation of law. And that's when something about the contract is not quite legal, I guess, per se, like where there's something that made one of the party not be able to actually be a part of the contract. One of these is bankruptcy. So if one of the parties becomes bankrupt and they can't continue on their end of the bargain of the contract, there's usually kind of a way they could put around it, or they make that company like still at least get some of their losses, but like it's kind of hard when one of them is bankrupt, so that's usually they can just kind of work a way around it. Then there's also commercial impracticability, and that's when the original assumption of the contract becomes way more expensive than originally thought, or it becomes much harder. So like I know with the environment today, or with like how taxes and everything's going, and how all the prices, everything's raising, it's hard to kind of predict for the future how much certain items are going to cost. So that can be a part of this commercial impracticability, because it just keeps rising and they're not able to actually perform what they said they could because of inflation. Or if something with the weather keeps happening, keeps delaying a project, it's becomes significantly more difficult to actually complete that contract. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is the material alteration of the contract. So this is when if one company or one part of the party does not, or forgets to mention there's a change on one of the numbers or something like that, or the material fact of it, and didn't tell the other party, then this can be material alteration of the contract, because the other party did not know, and so they can discharge it because, well, they didn't know about certain parts of the contract, or they weren't made known that there were changes to it.